to provide the most detailed account of the most important events you need to know about right now. Let's start with something positive. After all, we do love to begin with some good news. The Romanian consulate has opened in Lviv, and cooperation between the two countries, Ukraine and Romania, is certainly deepening. But what else are we going to talk about? The top important topics are coming up next in a brief preview. 35 countries are participating in the coalition summit, with security guarantees for Ukraine on the agenda. The latest information comes live from Paris. The Russian military command has set a new goal for its soldiers: to capture Kupiansk by February. The enemy army is trying to break through, but without success.
Putin has backed himself into a rather idiotic situation. Just take a look. He has, in fact, publicly and professionally declared to the whole world 3 times that the Russian army has complete and total control over Kupiansk. We systematically and methodically pushed the Russians out of Kupiansk, primarily by blocking their logistics.
The Indian energy giant has officially refused to purchase Russian oil. Experts agree that this happened against the backdrop of Trump's statements about introducing new import tariffs. 3 law enforcement officers were injured as a result of a Russian strike on the suburbs of Zaporizhzhia, and V. Pevedron attacked a police car while it was driving on the highway. Also, according to local authorities, a local resident was killed in the city itself due to shelling by the Russian army. In total, over the past day, Russian occupiers carried out nearly 900 strikes on 36 settlements in the region. They used artillery, multiple rocket launch systems, as well as drones and aviation. Russian forces attacked Novgorod-Siversky in the Chernihiv region with drones. Civilian infrastructure facilities were targeted by the Russian army. In particular, 3 drones hit a hangar. The Russians also attacked private homes, causing a fire to break out. Windows and doors were damaged, according to local authorities. Additionally, destruction was recorded at a food industry facility near Chernihiv. Furthermore, Russian forces struck Ukrainian energy facilities in several regions. Subscribers in Kharkiv and Donetsk regions are without power. This was reported by Ukrenergo. Some areas are still partially without electricity. The city of Slavutich in Kyiv region. Restoration work is underway everywhere that safety conditions allow, the energy workers noted. Nearly 100 combat clashes have occurred on the front since the beginning of the day, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The highest number of Russian assaults has been recorded in the areas of Huliaipole and Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, the Russian command has once again ordered its troops to supposedly capture Kupiansk. At the same time, Ukrainian defenders are searching for the remains of invading soldiers who are hiding in the basements of apartment buildings. More details about the situation on the front can be seen next.
Ukraine's defense forces have struck the 100th arsenal of the main missile and artillery directorate of the Russian Ministry of Defense in the Kostroma region. There are storage facilities there for the long-term storage of ammunition for the ground forces. Ukrainian drones also struck the Kherson Plus oil depot near the settlement of Streletsky Khutora in the Lipetsk region. In addition, enemy drone control points were hit in the Donetsk, Kursk and Belgorod regions. In all cases, hits on the targets were confirmed, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Russian military leadership has set a new objective for its troops: to retake Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. Since February of this year, the enemy army has been trying to break into the city, but without success. Also, according to various estimates, there are currently between 60 and 100 Russian soldiers in Kupiansk itself, hiding in the basements of apartment buildings,
completely and utterly surrounded. Look, he has actually and truly declared to the entire global community 3 separate times that the Russian army in fact has complete and total control over Kupiansk. Yes, then Russian Z-bloggers and propagandists tried, so to speak, to cover for him, saying that he wasn't talking about total control but only partial control, and then that the Ukrainian army carried out large-scale counter-offensive operations with heavy casualties and effectively pushed the Russian army out of the territory of Kupiansk. We all understand perfectly well that there was no large-scale assault or counter-offensive actions by the Ukrainian army in this context. We systematically and methodically pushed the Russians out of Kupiansk, first and foremost by blocking their logistics. Their logistics were significantly complicated because the main supply route for the Russian assault groups infiltrating the Kupiansk area ran along the right bank of the river. The Oskil corridor is quite narrow in width. Accordingly, when it was cut off by Ukrainian defense forces, the enemy lost it. The ability to reliably and fully supply their forces and assets that had infiltrated into the center of the town of Kupiansk. Because all the pontoon and bridge crossings over the Oskil River, which the enemy had previously used to supply their grouping concentrated specifically on the right bank of this river, are now under fire from Ukrainian artillery. Accordingly, to speak of stable supply that is of the very...
At the same time, in the Konstantinovka direction, Ukrainian soldiers stopped Russian assaults in the areas of the settlements of Oleksandr Shultin, Pleshchivka, and towards Stepanivka and Sofiivka. Near Pokrovsk, fighting took place around Nekonorivka, Rodinske, Mirnohrad, Kotlin, Filia, and Hrishin. In the Huliaipole direction, it was the most intense. Now the defense forces have thwarted the invaders' attempts to advance towards Dobropilia, Varvarivka, Zeleny, and Priluhi.
Recently, the enemy has somewhat calmed its fervor. There have been fewer attacks on various sections of the front. Except for those sections of the front that are a priority for the enemy. Fighting continues in the area of Myronograd, in the area of Pokrovsk, accordingly in that direction,
in the area of Chasiv Yar and in the Lyman direction. There, the intensity is not decreasing at all, and this is a significant concentration of enemy combat activity, but on other sections of the front, to a certain extent, we can talk about stagnation.
Ukraine's defense forces thwarted a Russian assault using quad bikes in the direction of Yampil-Donetsk region. The enemy tried to take advantage of the heavy snowfall. With gale force winds and almost zero visibility, they tried to move their assault group unnoticed. Because of the bad weather, aerial reconnaissance was difficult and the Russian troops were counting on passing through undetected. However, the pilots of the Signum Battalion still managed to spot the invaders' advance and, thanks to coordinated action, eliminated enemy personnel and destroyed Russian equipment. Meanwhile, in the Zaporizhzhia direction, Ukrainian drone system operators eliminated Russian soldiers who were preparing for an assault using buggies and quad bikes. As Ukrainian soldiers note, the enemy uses light vehicles to quickly advance toward the positions of the defense forces. Thanks to coordinated efforts, reconnaissance, and strike drones, Russian mobile groups were destroyed while still on the approach, thwarting yet another attack attempt.
Given these trends, in the last 3 months, I mean October, November, and December, the number of Russian servicemen killed each day has exceeded the number wounded. In other words, the medical evacuation system is working very poorly, and both protective forces and means to ensure the resilience of those Russian troops are practically not being used. Well, obviously there is extremely little armored equipment on the battlefield, and moving across that very battlefield on the adaptation of automotive vehicles leads to a rather significant number of fatal outcomes among Russian assault troops. And
over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated another 940 Russian occupiers. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have exceeded 1,213,000 personnel. In addition, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 5 tanks the day before, 6 armored fighting vehicles, 46 artillery pieces, 1 MLRS and 1 air defense system. They also disabled 157 units of Russian automotive equipment.
A productive and important meeting of the Coalition of the Willing has just taken place in Paris. I think the viewers of Freedom who tuned in a bit earlier, during the broadcast of the program Our Time, were able to watch the live stream with simultaneous translation to see what was happening and hear the comments that followed the meeting. So, for those who have just joined us, let me say that a very important issue was discussed at the meeting: security guarantees for Ukraine. In particular, the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, stated that the European Council is ready to take on commitments to create a system of political and legally binding guarantees, which will be activated once a ceasefire comes into effect. Of course, all the details and main topics of the negotiations are known by our special correspondent in Europe, Vitaly Sizov. We are currently establishing a connection with him, connecting now. I hope he is already live with us. Vitaly, glad to see you. And of course, we want to hear all the details from you.
The talks are taking place here in Paris, where the leaders of 27 countries have gathered to provide Ukraine with security guarantees. There are already some concrete results. A declaration of intent was signed regarding the deployment of multinational forces between Ukraine, France, and the United Kingdom. Additionally, a final statement from all participants of this meeting was published. It comprehensively consists of 5 crucial main points that meticulously define the active participation of various countries in diligently providing robust security guarantees for Ukraine. Specifically, the countries have agreed to participate in the proposed mechanism for monitoring and verifying the ceasefire under the leadership of the United States. This is the first point. The second point is to participate in supporting the armed forces of Ukraine. The third point is to participate in supporting multinational forces that may be deployed in Ukraine. There will be commitments. This is the fourth point, which concerns supporting Ukraine in the event of a renewed Russian invasion. And there will also be commitments. This is the fifth and final point. It concerns deep, long-term defense cooperation with Ukraine. The foundation of Ukraine's defense should be an army with a strength of 800,000 personnel, and this army will be supported, including by Ukraine's European allies. First and foremost, this refers to financial support. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about the main outcomes of the meeting. We were fully prepared to host coalition forces for those who were willing. The details were worked out within the framework of other documents. It was determined which countries are ready to take the lead in certain areas, guaranteeing security on land, in the air, and at sea. We consider our Ukrainian forces based on our army to be the key element. All other elements will function. The militaries of France, Britain, and Ukraine have worked out the details regarding deployment, the number of specific types of weapons, the composition of the armed forces, what is needed, what can be effective. We already have such necessary details. We understand which country is preparing for what. I am ready from all countries, coalitions, and those who are willing. I want to thank every leader. I want to thank every state that truly wants to be part of a peaceful solution. And most importantly, the President of Ukraine noted that security guarantees are practically agreed upon bilaterally with the United States of America and may be signed in the near future. For the President of Ukraine, it is profoundly important that all these significant commitments, including those crucial agreements with the United States of America, go through national parliaments, so that in the unfortunate event that it is possible to reach an agreement on a ceasefire, the issue of either deploying troops or participating in international peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, the issue of providing military and financial assistance to Ukraine has already been resolved, and countries having secured the support of their legislators could promptly implement these security guarantees.
Vitaly, thank you for joining us. Right now, Volodymyr Zelensky is answering journalists' questions at a press conference. I suggest our viewers watch the live broadcast. We really did have well-developed steps forward. Yes, 90%, but every day we get a little closer and closer. Still, it's not enough. It will be enough when there is peace in Ukraine, when the war is over. We still have losses, so nothing is enough yet. For now. Thank you all. I truly appreciate this very much, and it holds significant meaning for me, impacting me deeply. Here, many important milestones are being discussed. One important milestone, perhaps, is that Germany is ready to join the military coalition. Chancellor, is it enough for you that soldiers are being stationed in the surrounding NATO area? Could you please elaborate a little more on the specific expectations that were communicated to you? You have already mentioned that Germany holds significant importance. It is a significant and pertinent question whether Germany, in its role as the biggest and most substantial supporter, should indeed be considered the leading face in this particular matter. As a general rule, the comprehensive security guarantee has not yet been fully and unequivocally secured. We have some very specific and actionable proposals to address this. If Germany is to be actively and formally involved, it unequivocally means there must first be a clear and deliberate decision by the German government following the necessary and formal approval from its parliament, ensuring democratic legitimacy. Therefore, I will diligently make comprehensive proposals to the government and the parliament, perhaps only after we have successfully achieved a complete and lasting ceasefire. When, within the broad and unified coalition of the willing, we ultimately reach a clear public consensus on precisely what actions we will undertake next, moving decisively in this particular direction, this may indeed be the absolutely right choice, meaning the significant deployment of troops into Ukraine, but it also profoundly means, above all else, strengthening the Ukrainian armed forces considerably. Troops can also be readily deployed in neighboring countries. In addition, these troops must always be prepared and ready in case of another potential act of aggression by Russia, which could occur at any time. The package has not been fully agreed upon, however, there is a near-term prospect and a promise. And the prospect is that a ceasefire from Russia must be achieved. And then to ensure this with military support for Ukraine and with a presence in Ukraine. This is not just military support for Ukraine. We are talking about military support to ensure peace and freedom in Europe. That is precisely why we are taking on these commitments. It's not only about Ukraine's territorial integrity, it's about long-term guarantees of political freedom and peace for Europe. We have always defended this, and deterrence must also be provided. This very issue will be considered now, just as it has been for the past 70 years. Thank you all very much, and good night. And once again, Happy New Year to everyone. You have just watched the live broadcast of the press conference following the summit of the Coalition of the Willing. Let me remind you that this summit addressed very important issues for Ukraine and for Europe. These are security guarantees for Ukraine. Well, now let's move on to other news. Germany is recording acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, and other manifestations of hybrid pressure from Russia and views them as preparation for a large-scale conflict. Bloomberg reports this, citing a confidential document, Bundeswehr, Germany's operational plan. Berlin warns that Russia is determined to test the strength of European borders, and Russia's hybrid war could escalate into what is known as a hot confrontation. The document notes that for Russia, Germany has become a priority target due to its role as NATO's key logistics hub in Europe. The main targets of possible attacks are considered to be the energy system and defense infrastructure, aiming to destabilize governance and create chaos at all levels of authority.
China has stated that in resolving Russia's war against Ukraine, it relies on 4 principles of peace. Among them are respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, including Ukraine, adhering to the goals and principles of the UN Charter, respecting the legitimate security interests of all states, as well as supporting all efforts aimed at the peaceful resolution of the war. This was stated at a briefing by Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning. She emphasized that from the very first day of the war, China has sought to promote peace talks and a political settlement of the situation in Ukraine. The Indian energy giant Reliance has officially refused to purchase Russian oil. The company does not expect any crude deliveries in January and has not received any in the past 3 weeks. According to Reuters, the refusal came amid strong warnings from U.S. President Donald Trump about the introduction of new import tariffs. This forced Delhi to choose between Moscow and Washington. Due to Western sanctions, imports from Russia have already plummeted to a 3-year low, dropping by nearly half compared to peak levels. Experts predict that in the near future, purchases will fall below the 1 million barrels per day mark. In effect, India is dropping out of the list of the Kremlin's key partners, leaving China as the only major consumer of Russian resources. Russia is trying to circumvent sanctions on the export of liquefied natural gas, Bloomberg reports, and according to the agency, fuel deliveries from the sanctioned Russian project Arctic LNG-2 are essentially dependent on a single specialized vessel. On January 5th, the ice-class tanker Krestov D. The Christophe de Margerie docked at the Arctic LNG-2 terminal to load its 3rd shipment of gas since December 20th. See more details in our report. The sanctioned tanker Christophe de Margerie is the only tanker in the Russian merchant fleet capable of operating in the Arctic. Year-round, experts explain. This vessel, the aggressor country uses it to deliver shipments of gas to the SAM storage facility in the Murmansk region in western Russia. From there, regular gas carriers transport the fuel to one of the few buyers of Russian-sanctioned LNG, China. It is precisely the presence of the vessel Christophe de Margerie that allows the Arctic LNG 2 plant to operate, though only at a quarter of its capacity. Arctic LNG 2 was forced to significantly cut production last winter due to a lack of transportation and full storage reserves. Last month, Russia completed the construction of its first domestically built LNG-class tanker, the Alexei Kosygin, which is now heading to the Arctic from the country's far east. This ship can also help open up more exports from the same plant. Expanding its presence in the Arctic is a top priority for the Kremlin. After all, for Putin, this is not just a source of resources, but also a key element of geopolitical strategy tied to future economic development and strengthening Moscow's position on the world stage, analysts believe. That is why, during negotiations with the United States, Russia has repeatedly tried to promote a number of economic initiatives. Among them is a project to develop large natural gas fields in the Arctic seas. However, at present, Washington is more inclined not toward cooperation, but toward increasing sanctions pressure on the aggressor country. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened India, one of the largest importers of Russian oil, with new tariffs. Washington has already raised tariffs on most Indian goods to 50%. After that, in November 2025, the Indian energy giant Reliance Industries completely stopped purchasing Russian fuel from the sanctioned Rosneft and Lukoil. However, it later began buying raw materials from other Russian suppliers. Trump is also dissatisfied with Putin himself, who refuses peace initiatives and continues the war against Ukraine.
I'm not impressed with Putin. He kills too many people. I thought it would be different. Well, take Thailand and Cambodia. They were at war, and I literally stopped that war in 5 hours. I told them they needed to restore peace, and I told them this had to be resolved. But the situation between Russia and Ukraine is a bad situation. A lot of bad things are happening. I would like to save lives.
The president of Ukraine is convinced that a compromise from Russia is only possible if sanctions are combined with active military support for Ukraine and the continuation of dialogue involving the US and Europe. Volodymyr Zelensky reminded that the Russian Federation is only willing to talk when it feels real strength.
To talk. Not just to talk on the phone, but to talk with sanctions, to talk with military support for Ukraine. Many processes are slow, for example with air defense. The Russians know this very well, they are aware, they see a lot. Pressure, I wish the US would apply more pressure. Although, to be honest with you, their team worked a lot with our team throughout December. Really a lot, a whole lot. I am grateful to them for that. And I truly don't think there is a real, quick and effective alternative to the important dialogue we currently have right now.
Meanwhile, the European Union is preparing to adopt the 20th package of sanctions against Russia. It is expected to be agreed upon by the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, writes Welt, citing sources. Special attention is planned to be focused on all those involved in the abduction of Ukrainian children. According to diplomats, Brussels may impose additional sanctions on the energy sector and the banking sector of the aggressor country. There is also consideration of a possible ban on the import of Russian uranium and the introduction of restrictions against Rosatom. Yulia Granovskaya for Freedom TV channel.
Villages in Russia are rapidly dying out. Just last year, almost 270 settlements were officially liquidated there. Most of them were completely uninhabited. Some small villages are simply merged with larger ones. And as reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, in fact, this is a legal formalization of the demographic decline in the Russian Federation. In other words, Russian regions are consistently losing population, and the deserted territories are being repurposed for economic use.
For the second time, Kostroma Oblast has become the leader in the disappearance of settlements, followed by Novgorod Oblast. In third place is Perm Krai, where not only is the so-called death of villages being recorded, but remote settlements with small populations are also being deliberately resettled. This stands in stark contrast to Moscow's loud proclamations about a new master settlement plan, which is supposedly meant to revive the provinces. In reality, however, the document merely records a deep demographic crisis, spatial inequality, and the hopelessness of the periphery. Life in half-empty villages without healthcare, education, or jobs attracts no one, and the effort to disperse the population is merely an attempt to cosmetically cover up the failure. From a report by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service on the agency's website.
The U.S. special operation in Venezuela and the arrest of Nicolas Maduro have dealt a geopolitical blow to Russia. Moscow is not only losing a key partner in Latin America, but also risks losing its own oil revenues, according to analysts. The Russian Foreign Ministry condemned Maduro's detention, but Putin did not offer him any help, even though Moscow has long played the role of a haven for fugitive dictators. My colleague Natalia Gusak will continue on this topic.
Nicolas Maduro and his wife were brought to the federal court in Manhattan on January 5th, 2 days after they were captured in the Venezuelan capital Caracas. Maduro is accused of narco-terrorism and collaborating with criminal groups to traffic cocaine into the United States, as well as possessing and using weapons in connection with drug trafficking. Experts believe that the events in Venezuela have dealt a heavy blow to the Kremlin.
Russia has something to lose because, first of all, Russian oil companies are actively involved in Venezuela's oil industry. They have a stake there. And if the United States is going to establish control and push out its opponents, then Russia could potentially lose access to Venezuela's oil industry. Secondly, there is the risk of a pause in supplies from Venezuela to other regions, which directly affects Russia.
The U.S. operation in Venezuela was sharply condemned in Belarus, Cuba, China, and of course in Russia. Maduro has long been an ally of Putin, and the Kremlin has invested considerable money in the country. In addition, Moscow and Caracas are jointly engaged in maritime oil trade, bypassing sanctions. Venezuela is considered one of Russia's priority allies, along with Iran, China, and North Korea, analysts explain.
Russia was presented with a fait accompli. This is an unpleasant situation for them. Once again, after Syria and after the Israeli strike on Iran this summer, the Kremlin's inability to help its allies was demonstrated. Konstantin Eggert, commentator for Deutsche Welle, in a comment for Radio Liberty.
Of course, it's an important region for Moscow, truly a stronghold for Russia in the area. A long-standing and ancient ally without whom it would have been and will be very difficult for America.
Moscow is demoralized by the display of U.S. power, writes Le Monde.
The removal of Maduro is, without a doubt, a blow to Putin. This shows that the Russian air defense systems installed around Caracas, as well as the recently signed strategic partnership agreements between Russia and Venezuela, are useless against American power. Peter Ruff, director of the Center for Europe and Eurasia at the Hudson Institute, in an interview with Le Monde.
Experts suggest that Maduro did not have time and perhaps did not even plan to flee to Russia, although Moscow has repeatedly provided asylum to ousted leaders of authoritarian regimes. This was also the case with the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. International organizations have repeatedly accused Assad and his inner circle of human rights violations.